Hello! Welcome back to my humble abode, my cramped side room of interests, where I have sat down and... Well, I can't actually say that I've sat down and watched every single anime, because that is absolutely untrue. I completely skipped over Suicide Squad Isekai, because, like, why? Do I need to watch that? I feel like that's one of those shows where you already know if you're going to like it or not without having to watch a single episode of it. And I just don't feel the need. But it does mean, of course, that then I can't say that I have watched everything, and that kind of sucks, but I mean, usually there's always something that I miss. Anyway, so this just might be safer, and instead I can say that I've just watched a lot of anime from the summer 2024 anime season. And we're gonna talk about them, but no sequels, prequels, or spin-offs. Welcome to the season of retreaded ideas and the occasional gem that maybe I will hype up too much for my own good. But let's go over everything and hopefully learn what is good, what is frosty, and what I will actually want to spend my time watching this season. Welcome to Class Reflection, everyone. Let's jam. 2.5 Dimensional Seduction. The main character is a typical horny high school teenager with an obsessive fascination with 2D girls in general and one skimpily dressed anime character in particular. He is the one and only member of his high school's manga club, and he spouts out the tried and true mentality that he doesn't need no 3D girls, as no 3D girl could possibly live up to his stupidly insane standards. Cut to this young high school girl who enters the club room and wishes to join the manga club. She, coincidentally, also loves the exact same character as him, claiming herself to be said character's biggest fan, to the point where she shares with this stranger of a schoolmate that she would love to become this character. And only viewers of the show's opening will realize that she means that in more ways than one. See, the problem I have here with this show is that there is coincidence and there is contrivance. Coincidence is our main protagonist somehow meeting a girl with the same very specific character fascination as him. Contrivance is for that same girl to not only want to cosplay and become said character of our protagonist's dreams, but is so open about her apparent fantasies that she shares with our protagonist, who she just met, I remind you, that she wants to essentially make softcore porn with herself dressed as said character. And if that wasn't enough, she then proceeds to undress in the club room to change into her costume, again with the boy whom she just met standing right there. God looked at this man and said, "You know what, buddy? All of your wishes are coming true today. Here is your perfect Starbucks order of a girlfriend, gifted to you on a silver platter. And if that's the kind of wish fulfillment fantasy that you want, please enjoy." But I'm moving on. A journey through another world, raising kids while adventuring. Once again, I find myself facing an isekai where so much of the setting is boring and uninteresting, but if I can just somehow look past all of that, which is a lot, there is at least some redeeming qualities to make the series worth a look. So our protagonist was once a normal late 20s Japanese man, but some god from another world, while attempting to fix a kind of dimensional anomaly, ended up killing him. We don't see any of this because apparently that would have been too hard to animate. As an apology for his untimely death, the god reincarnates our main character into the world of which he has dominion over, though he is just one god of several. I'm sure we'll get back to that. He gives our protagonist the usual slew of OP abilities, from a magic bag with infinite storage full of things he will conveniently need and use, some modern equivalent magic tech, and of course combat skills in line with a high-ranking adventurer. But this reincarnation is not fully an apology. It's not like he can just go and live his life in peace on Easy Street now, because the god has dropped him off in a high-ranked forest, and also nearby two abandoned twins who are also similarly overpowered for their age. The god's hope was that our protagonist would agree to become the caretaker for the twins and not ask too many questions about where they came from or why they are so strong, which he seems perfectly fine with. I say that the series is worth a look because the twins themselves are perfect angels of children, and watching them run around is totally cute to see, but like, there were also things I found to be dragging the show down, like the overpowered nature of our protagonist, and that regardless of how cute the twins are, they don't really seem to have personalities beyond, let's go do some cute things, and despite their age and lack of any guardians up to this point, they are also perfectly well-behaved, like, perfectly well-behaved. No tantrums, no explosions of emotion. These are less like children and more of just a personification of what someone thought children should be at all times, and it feels just a little bit too fake and off for me. So I'm putting this series on hold to see if it will answer some lingering questions I have about the setting, but I'm not holding up too much hope that I'll actually end up finishing it all by the end. A nobody's way up to an exploration hero. Modern era Japan with jammed in dungeon diving and monsters and other fantasy elements for when you want to kill monsters at a theme park but still go home to a television and a spring mattress at night. Our hero is the lowest of the low, spending like a year doing nothing but killing slimes at the nearby dungeon's lowest floor. But a surprise finding of a special golden slime gives him a gold-plated summon card. Our protagonist, instead of selling this card for several billion, decides to instead summon the busty beauty depicted on the card to help him in the dungeon instead. Now armed with a charming companion, Sylphie, he's ready to face the dungeon. Except not quite, because Sylphie doesn't seem to have the same presence as she did in card form and needs to be leveled up herself in order to function and grow properly. Problem is, she needs monster cores to feed on, but those same cores are what our protagonist uses to make money. So the more he uses on his summon, the less money he makes. Not a great situation. Not only that, but then he finds yet another summon card, and this time it's a devil character, and she's a heck of a lot more pushy for food, leaving him with even less money than he had before either of the two were even summoned. So now he has less money, two summons vying for his attention, a girl at school who seems to be really into him but doesn't like it when he spends all of his time in a dungeon, and like, there's just too much. After a handful of episodes, I gotta be honest, I'm not seeing the appeal. As a dungeon crawling series, our protagonist is moving painfully slow, and even if he wasn't, we still don't know why he keeps dungeon diving, besides some childhood dream to just be good at it. We don't seem to be utilizing the modern world all that much, which makes me question why it's even there, when it really just seems like it wants to be a fantasy dungeon series. Maybe it's just trying to be unique, I guess? Either way, I'm gonna pass on this one. Alya sometimes hides her feelings in Russian. A rom-com where the twist is that the main female lead is a massive tsundere, but unlike the traditional tsundere where we spend episode upon episode with only the nearest hint of the gooey dere center of her character, Alya leaves her dere side right out in the open by acting dere in Russian. She thinks that when she's pining for our main protagonist, she's being cheeky because she's doing it in a language he doesn't understand. So then she just kind of vents her desires out loud without fear of embarrassment. But plot twist, our protagonist understands Russian, but he doesn't reveal this fact to her because he thinks that she would just like die of embarrassment immediately. And she absolutely would. This is actually a great twist. It allows for a unique way of letting our characters' thoughts out, besides just doing the, traditional speaking to themselves in their head, which, to be fair, the show also does as well. But I mean, it kicks it up a notch by layering all that together with a feast of animation that Quentin Tarantino was salivate over. For its uniqueness alone, I'm gonna keep it for the time being, but we'll see how long that lasts. Atri, My Dear Moments. Well, I mean, I can give a few points to Atri for uniqueness. I'm just not sure if it's for me. I'm also getting a weird tonal whiplash from this show, a kind that I wasn't expecting. Like, look at the poster for this show. Look at how bright and colorful this is. There are cute girls, a nice blue sky and sea, and then you turn on episode 1, and I thought I clicked on the wrong show because you're looking at a war zone. Turns out our protagonist has a bit of a traumatic past, one that involved him losing a leg and now relies on prosthetics to move. Soon, we realize that he does live in some kind of technologically advanced world, at least compared to our present, but his main limiting factor in getting a new limb is money. which he doesn't have. But he's been convinced by this sketchy friend that his old grandmother's property has some kind of treasure buried at it, and they should excavate it and sell what they find. But said property is currently under the ocean. Oh yeah, several massive changes to the planet have led to significant changes to the country's coastlines. Towns that were previously near the water are now clearly under it. And when he does get to his grandmother's old place, though, he doesn't find treasure, but instead a stasis pod looking thing with a young girl inside. The girl is named Atri, and she is a robot, because again, technological advanced society. So now our protagonist is torn about what to do with this cute robot, and I'm torn on whether or not I want to continue this show or not. There's no real flaws to the design or its narrative. It's just not something that has particularly grabbed me. I'm sure that it has a lot to say about trauma and moving past that. At least, I hope that's where it goes. Otherwise, just watching the protagonist live in despair would be depressing. So I'm passing on it, not because it's not worth the watch, but because it's just not for me. Bye Bye Earth. At the time of me writing this script, though it's not actually true by the time I'm filming it, Bye Bye Earth only had one episode out, and it's always kind of hard to get a grasp on what some shows are with just a single episode. Here, we have a female protagonist, a human in a world full of only beastmen. She was apparently found in a rock or stone somewhere as a very young child and has bounced around to different families, getting discriminated against for her lack of beast features until she felt a calling from a magical sword and broke into a castle to retrieve it. At which point she was captured, but because of some mysterious legend or importance behind that sword, she was assigned a father by the kingdom who will teach her how to use that sword and trains her to fight, giving her an occupation that would help society by hunting unfriendly monsters, beasts, and weird mammal-like plants who live in large bodies of water. As is standard for a show like this, its first episode asks more questions than it answers. She desperately wants to find more people like her and figure out where she came from. Those answers, those revelations, are what I think are currently keeping the series interesting. So for the moment, I'm keeping it on hold. The animation is great. The music is handled by the great Kevin Penkin himself, which is always a standout, so I'm hopeful that I will end up loving the series. But at this moment, experience has taught me to be cautious, so on hold, it will stay. Dahlia in Bloom, crafting a fresh start with magical tools. An isekai with a protagonist who dies of overwork, getting reincarnated into a fantasy world where she dives into her work as a magical artificer wholeheartedly, seemingly having learned nothing. Still, though, this is an example of an isekai I love, where after the first handful of scenes, and barring a couple of personal introspections, you completely forget that it's an isekai. But being reincarnated is still an important plot point because it's her knowledge that she then uses for her inventions, like building a hairdryer or making waterproof fabric. Of course, the narrative isn't all invention. Dahlia gets set up into an arranged marriage by her father, though it doesn't pan out all that well when the guy falls in love with the trade guild's secretary or some such, then asking for an annulment of their engagement, but also trying to weasel his way into keeping his name on Dahlia's inventions. There's also this dragon warrior guy that she meets on the road while she's dressed as a boy that's taken a liking to her, even though she was in a boy mode. There's just so much in this series. I just want to know what's going to keep happening to Dahlia going forward. I think she's a wonderful character that I want to see succeed in her new life, and for that reason, I'm keeping this one. Days with My Stepsister. You know, what I got from this series is very different from what I was expecting based on the title, but perhaps I'm used to something very different when the topic of little sisters come about. So this is a romance series, ostensibly, though there's nothing romantic that has really occurred at time of writing. Our characters are not jabbing at one another, annoyed at their new life circumstances after their parents have been married, nor is this a series really angled toward comic relief, as it's not a comedy whatsoever. Instead, this show has two protagonists who are both probably a little over mature for their age, taking the new situation of their parents having gotten together very calmly and logically. Neither character is looking at this new living situation as a chance for their own love to blossom, and in fact, both seem pretty apathetic to that idea. So what I'm really enjoying is just how off from the norm the narrative is here. I'm happy that we don't have those quirky situations, that random forced-in fan service, or, you know, those moments of embarrassment where, like, the guy accidentally walks in on his sister while she's bathing or changing. Yeah, none of that! This is not that kind of show, and I can appreciate it. The downside is that while it's a romantic slice of life, I can't say that it's a very positive feeling one. Our female lead, Saki, seems, I don't know if the word broken is a good one to describe her, as she doesn't seem to be abused or coming from an obvious place of trauma, but her attitude towards the world is leaning on the depressing side. And while you can logic a lot of that away, I still just have this desire to see her character be happy, and I worry about how long that'll take to happen, if it happens at all. Overall, I do love most of the direction that the series seems to be going in. The only thing that gives me pause is how down in the dumps it seems to want to stay. If it gets out of that funk and helps me, you know, actually enjoy watching the series, then I could see myself completing it. So I'm gonna give it a chance, and we're gonna see if that happens, and until then, I'm gonna put it on hold. Dungeon People. Oh man, how have I desperately wanted a show like this. So Dungeon People starts off like your bog standard dungeon fantasy. You got a female protagonist with an adventurer father. He raises her to be a good adventurer and to go after challenging dungeons, but he disappears one day and she just keeps training to go deeper and deeper into the local dungeon. Only once she reaches further than she ever has before, she finds out what is behind the curtain, so to speak. The overall setting of the show is a lot like... Oh shoot, I have it, don't I? It's a lot like the book from Diana Wayne Jones, the Dark Lord of Darkholm. This is about a fantasy world that exists elsewhere and takes in tourists from our world, essentially giving them an adventuring fantasy as a tourist attraction for their own local economy. It's a place where all the standard fantasy and adventuring tropes are utilized to give the guests the best experience while showcasing the troubles in the back end of what that means for a fantasy world at large. And this anime gives me a lot of those same vibes. This is a lot like that. The dungeon here is run by a seemingly young girl named Belle, who is tasked with managing the place. She hires monsters that not only act as enemies for all the various floors, but she's in charge of stocking dungeon chests, fixing and maintaining traps, and a whole bunch of maintenance that most traditional dungeons just kind of hand wave away and say, magic fixed it. Belle ends up hiring our female adventurer, Clay, as she would like to have some extra experience from someone who knows how to run dungeons from the other side of the curtain. And we get to dive deeper into how this dungeon works and what it takes to maintain. This is not going to be an epic fantasy adventure series, and honestly, I'm perfectly fine with that. That itch will get scratched somewhere else, I'm sure, but I just love this cheeky slice of life dungeon series, and I definitely will be keeping it for the duration of the season. Failure Frame. I became the strongest and annihilated everything with low-level spells. It's a revenge isekai. What is that, you ask? Well, it's a bog-standard isekai where the protagonist is introduced to a bunch of despicable characters, and then we pull this whole, our protagonist is worthless, his skills are useless. But actually, no, he's again the most overpowered person, and after he's treated absolutely terribly by all of these people, including the goddess who summoned them here, he wants to go on a revenge spree against all of those people that essentially kind of left him to die. I really did try with this one to overcome my personal dislike of the revenge isekai subgenre, is it? But even after 3 episodes, our protagonist didn't seem to get all that much further in his revenge plot, and instead we seem to be setting up a more general common isekai setting and then just ignoring the revenge plot, which makes me question why it was there in the first place. Who knows? Honestly, I sure don't know, nor will I ever, because I'm tossing it. I Parry Everything. Sometimes I just love short and to the point show titles. I Parry Everything, which has the same type of confidence to it of like saying, to be clear, I don't mean I parry a bunch of things that are thrown at me. I parry everything. Heck, episode 2 is called I Parry Rewards, and our protagonist literally sidesteps and refuses a ward from the princess that he saved. I mean, he's a bit of a how can I say this politely? He's a simpleton, but considering the world he lives in, it's kind of understandable. Anyway, the show is your standard fantasy. I would say it's your standard isekai, but since our protagonist is not from our world and is actually from this world, that descriptor doesn't fit. Thankfully. Despite that, though, we go through a bunch of hallmarks of the genre. Our protagonist goes around trying to gain skills to become an adventurer, but is continually unable to. Because here, in order to register as even an E-rank adventurer, you need 2 useful skills, and he only has 1. Parry. But it's not like anyone seems to realize just how useful that one skill can be. But our protagonist goes through life accepting that he will never be good enough to realize his dreams of becoming a powerful adventurer. And instead, he just goes around town doing odd jobs because that's all people think he's good enough to do. That's all he thinks he's good enough to do. He doesn't even reach the level where he's allowed to go to like the local forest and pick herbs. He can't even do that. But as expected, his parry skill is actually super overpowered. So much so that he can parry the attacks of an A-ranked Minotaur demon, and the worst that happens is that his sword breaks. But our protagonist is so beaten down that he doesn't realize how strong he really is, which is the bulk of the show's entertainment. His naivety combined with this world that doesn't know how to handle his skills is immensely entertaining. And as people eventually realize the truth, he will hopefully have a better future. A future that I am looking forward to watching. So I'm keeping this one. Love is Indivisible by twins. Oh boy, twins. You know, for being such a stereotypical fantasy that men have where they want to go out with twins, right? Want to have twin girlfriends or just spend an evening with them. I think this series deftly displays why we don't actually see more stories of this nature. Because basically having a relationship with twins is a really bad idea. Why disappoint one girl when you can disappoint 2 for the price of 1? That's not really being all that fair to our protagonist here, though. He's just your everyday common nerd who just so happens to have 2 beautiful twin neighbors that have lost the ability to communicate properly with one another, leaving him in the lurch. First, one of the sisters gets the courage to ask him out. Okay, he accepts, he thinks that they are doing great as a couple, having a grand old time, and then she dumps him. Not because she doesn't love him anymore, she absolutely still loves him, but she feels terrible for her sister and wants him to date her instead. But said sister, not knowing any of this, because again, a severe lack of communication is taking place, she also doesn't think that she should be dating our protagonist because she believes her sister is in love. And she wants the first sister to not feel terrible either. Like, there is no right answer here or right move in this situation. And I really do feel for this guy who's being surrounded by these women who can't communicate with themselves or with him. And he can't figure out what they want. They don't even know what they want. And of course, he can't choose between them because he doesn't want to hurt either of them either. So what is he going to do? I mean, the only logical solution is a harem, but oddly, I don't get those vibes from this series enough to feel like that's where it's going. So like on the one hand, I am curious as to what the plan is here, as to where these relationships are heading. But on the other hand, things have gotten so complicated, even with just the first few episodes gone through, that I'm worried nothing will end up getting resolved, and I will have waded through 12 episodes of awkwardness for nothing. Like, I'm gonna do it, of course, but I can see myself just being depressed by the end of it. We're keeping it, I guess. Too many losing heroines. And we move from a guy with 2 girls who can't decide which of them to love more to a guy who has a bunch of girls who don't seem to love him at all, but for some reason find him easy enough to talk to so that they can dump all of their emotional baggage on. Lovely. I mean, that really does describe the whole show so far. He keeps meeting too many losing heroines, as he puts it. Girls who keep getting dumped or ignored by the boys in their life that they love. Like, there's one that has to keep dealing with hanging around her crush because her childhood friend is now dating her best friend. And while it's not like she and said childhood friend were actually dating because she never had the courage to ask him out, it's still painful for her because now she has to hang out with her former best friend and her former childhood friend, and they're all lovey-dovey as a couple together, and she hates it. Can't she just not? Well, no, because if she wasn't there, who knows what this couple in love would do? And she can't handle that. Like, I feel for our protagonist here. I really do. But I don't know if I feel for him enough to try and share the emotional load of who knows how many more heroines that he's gonna have to put up with until one of them maybe decides to have a relationship with him. We're tossing this one. MAYONAKA Punch. Oh boy, how to start with this one. Our protagonist gets kicked out of her 3-person YouTube group because of creative differences, and despite desperately trying to crawl back into relevance, seems to just keep digging herself a deeper hole for herself. Her quick temper and somewhat self-centered personality don't help things all that much. But what sets this series apart from some kind of pity party or tale of simple social revenge turns supernatural when she meets a vampire called Live, who wants to feast upon her blood. But being the enterprising young woman that she is, she decides, hey, you can drink my blood all you want, but in return, you have to use your supernatural powers to help me make a YouTube channel with 1 million subscribers. We're moving on. My dear friend, Nokotan. Do I need to tell you to watch this? No, I'm being perfectly serious. Do I need to tell you to watch this? Like, when trying to determine what shows have become popular in any given season, like what shows you need to pay attention to, the easiest ones are the ones that you hear about without even trying. So when you have a show that has such a super addictive opening to the extent that, I don't know, VTubers are making shorts dedicated to them dancing to its music, it's reached the level of cultural relevance where even if you don't end up liking the series yourself, you probably should watch it anyway just to understand the shifts and changes in the cultural landscape that will follow. Personally though, of course I'm watching this. It's a meta-comedy series that stars a former delinquent and an oblivious deer girl. And I remember the last time a comedy anime had a deer in it. And that was great. 10 out of 10. Keeping this one. Quickly though, let's take a break for a moment. Give me a chance to collect myself before we continue with the next section, because I wanted to give shoutouts to supporters of this channel from over on Patreon, because this video is not sponsored, and the more support we get over there, the less sponsors that Glass Reflection will need at any given time. So an immense thank you, especially to patrons like Ross Emerson, Hector Montemayor, Aiden, City Yamako, Ryfen Bonaparte, Sailor Arashi, and Omar Showman. We cannot continue this without your support, so however much you are able to, I am eternally grateful. My wife has no emotion. You might hear that title and think, oh, a calming romance with the female lead being a kudere type girl. But you would be wrong. His wife has no emotion because she never came with any. She's a robot, a mechanical device that even our protagonist likens to that of a rice cooker, a home appliance. And yet, he also calls her his wife. I am torn between the utter sadness that is this show's premise, you know, having a guy who can only find love in a housekeeping robot that he bought secondhand, alongside the potential of, I don't know, some kind of story about her overcoming her programming and learning to love him in return. I mean, there is a level of nostalgia there for me as well, because like shows like Chobits and Maharumatic were some of the first things that I ever watched when I became an anime fan. So with that in mind, I'm keeping it, and we're gonna see where it goes. Oh god, I'm losing my voice, aren't I? Crap. Narenare Cheer for you. At first I thought that this was going to be a cheerleading anime, which it is, but before watching the first episode, I thought that that was going to be all this was about. And that would have made it an easy pass because, well, I don't care that much about cheerleading. But the show goes to great lengths to go beyond just cheerleading, and it begins to develop its cast far further than, you know, just a group of archetypal characters whose only common feature is the premier sport of the show. I've seen so many anime that do only that I feel like I've become jaded. Well, I mean, I am jaded, but not because of that. So our protagonist has a bit of trauma because when she was once part of a national championship cheerleading team, one of her best friends got injured during nationals and now can't walk anymore. So because of this, she herself can't seem to remain passionate about the sport that caused her friend so much pain. But she eventually meets a group of girls from a variety of athletic backgrounds, and with their help, she seems to be on the path to overcoming said trauma and entering the world of cheerleading once again. just with a smaller team and a much smaller chance of injury. Even with all those strides to break away from the simple and boring, I'm still not sure if this is a series for me personally. I can appreciate the effort, and I do hope that it finds its audience, because it does, to me, feel like it's a show that deserves one. I'm just aware enough to know that I am not part of it, so I'm tossing it. No longer allowed in another world. This is so meta. I love it. We have reached the point in isekai stories where it's not even a matter of being like, oh, hey, it's Truck-kun, come to whisk our protagonist away. No, it's like, actually, Truck-kun is a service we provide to transport depressed people to another world so that they can have better ones. It's just so perfect. Also, our protagonist this time desperately is trying to find a way to die. He has attempted a double suicide, got killed by Truck-kun only to be reincarnated, and then now he keeps trying to go and off himself, but the universe keeps having something in store to keep him around. What a wretched existence our protagonist has, which is why I'm keeping it. For the same reason, like, I loved Sayonara Zetsubu Sensei back in the day. Like, seeing what heights, or perhaps more accurately, lows that our protagonist will reach is sure to be a decent amount of entertainment. This is it. Plus-sized elf. Please know that one of the genres that are listed under this show is ecchi. That is to say, it can be somewhat suggestive, perhaps even seductive in nature. So, considering that this show is called Plus-Sized Elf, the title is all you need to know. Moving on. Pseudo Harem. Well, this is certainly unique. It's a romance series that involves one guy and one girl. Then how is it a harem, you may ask? Well, that's why it's a pseudo harem, because the girl is an actress and she chooses to swap into different personalities depending on the situation. And since our male protagonist has always wanted to have his own harem, dating her is like having this one girl who really is more like 5 girls. That's perfect, right? I mean, it's cute. I appreciate it for that, but at least at the start, I'm feeling like all of the character development here went into our female lead, probably because she has a whole bunch of personalities to juggle now, but by contrast, our male protagonist is as developed as a piece of wet cardboard. So a true and proper romance is something that I feel like is a bit out of reach. Like, I'm intrigued by its premise, all right? And I'm gonna give it more time, but if the wet cardboard remains, this is gonna get tossed pretty quick. Quality assurance in another world. You know, out of all of the jobs available to help make a video game, QA is probably the least appealing of the bunch to me. So watching an anime that essentially takes the whole trapped in an MMO thing, but adds in, oh, the main character was a debugger for the game. He can no-clip everywhere, but for some reason has some strange morals against it because he was told not to by the people who made the game, you know, the very game he's been trapped in for a year. There's just a bunch of this setting that makes no sense to me, but there's a level of mystery to it as well. Like, our hero has attempted to complete this one specific quest over and over again to save a single village, failing multiple times. But when he finally does save them, well, they all burn up anyways, except for one young girl who comes back to life. Why? Who knows? It's a mystery, but it is one that I am actually legitimately curious about. So while I am not entirely impressed with the show at large, I'll stick around for a bit longer. But also, you know, I'll stick around because of, well, the show has bagpipes. I need to stick around for the bagpipes. Ramen Akaneko. Here's the thing. Right? You know how historically everyone, myself included admittedly, can go on and on about great animation and how bad animation can bring down a series? I mean, I do stand by that opinion, but I want to emphasize the part where bad animation can bring down a series. Not that it always does. Is the animation of Ramen Akaneko good? No! I can't honestly give it that title. I've tossed shows for far less. But in this case, I don't feel like the animation matters all that much. I mean, better animation would certainly help. This is a series about a group of cats who run a ramen shop, and cats going around doing cute cat things could always benefit from better animation. Yes, but I feel like the heart of this show that has a human girl who needs a job and finds a position at this restaurant that up until this point has only employed cats, it's a situation that's impressively charming to the point where any negative that I do have about its animation just feels like it gets washed away. I mean, I doubt I'm gonna be putting it on any like best of season list or anything, but oh man, I'm gonna watch this one all the way through. It's good, I love it, solid keep. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin. A harvest god who has grown complacent by providing only rice offerings harvested long ago by her own parents is given a harsh reality check when a group of humans stumble into the land of the gods and cause events that accidentally set fire to her rice storehouse, leaving her with nothing. No longer able to rely on the labors of her parents to survive, the god Sakuna sets off with the humans in tow to the Isle of Demons where her parents once lived in order to learn how to cultivate more rice and slay a bunch of demons. I am actually liking this. Sakuna as a character has a lot of growth ahead of her, and I actually feel like she's going to get it this time. She starts off as a useless goddess of the harvest, but is slowly coming to terms with her new situation and seems to be primed for some hefty character development, which to me makes her very endearing. Much more so than a bunch of other useless goddesses I could name. Her new band of humans is what I'm still a little lukewarm about. We've yet to see much of their importance and like involvement into the plot beyond just being a catalyst for existing events. And Sakuna seems to be, forced to do most of the work for them since she's a goddess and all. So I hope that they learn to help out too with more things and become useful as time passes. But this quaint story about farming rice seems interesting enough. So I'm gonna hold on to this one. Senpai is an Otokonoko. Well, this one is pretty self-explanatory as long as you know what an Otokonoko is. We have a young first-year student named Saki who becomes infatuated with an older student named Makoto. After gathering up her courage, she confesses her love, only for Makoto to reveal that he isn't a girl at all despite appearances, and apologizes that he can't go out with her. Of course, the show would be over if that was the end of it. So instead, we find out that Saki is a truly weird individual, and the fact that her beloved female senpai is actually a boy and can swap between the two only makes her love him even more. She has weirdly stalkerish tendencies, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. But that's not all the show has to offer. Makoto also has a childhood friend named Ryuji, who himself has been in love with Makoto since kindergarten. So you have Makoto with two sides to him, a guy who fell in love with his boy side, a girl who fell in love with his girl side, and he himself who doesn't seem to hold any romantic attraction to either of them. What could go wrong? The answer is a lot. A lot could go wrong, but who knows where this show is actually going. I've generally become worried at most romance anime because I absolutely hate shows that string us along and provide no satisfying conclusion to a relationship, or even just like a peek at what could come after high school in this case. But when you start off this strong with a love triangle, like, where's that gonna go? Sure, the journey to wherever they may be headed is where the fun could be, but to me that's like saying, hey, do you want to take a multi-hour drive to the dump? The drive itself will be amazing with great views and good company, but at the end of the day, you're still at the dump. At least that's where I stand on romances currently, and since this does not fit the bill for me, I'm gonna pass on it. SHOSHIMIN, How to Become Ordinary. After I finished watching the first episode of this series, I thought to myself, I know that Kyoto Annie didn't do this, but it's giving off heavy Hyoka vibes. So I decided to try and figure out why. And the first thing I learned is that it's based off of a Japanese novel series that began publication over 20 years ago in 2004. So despite me never hearing about it because it's not like there was an English release or anything, it's actually been around for a while. And the second thing that I learned is that its author also wrote Hyoka, fully explaining the similar vibes between the two shows. But this does not answer my thoughts as to why I thought this felt more like a ripoff of Hyoka and nowhere near as good. If this show predated Hyoka, that would make sense, but it doesn't because its novel was written 3 years later. So while it retains many of the similarities with Hyoka, like a slightly aloof male protagonist with near supernatural abilities to solve mysteries, a female classmate who doesn't love him romantically but still wants to spend time with him as friends, like, there's far less to grab onto here compared to Hyoka as I would have liked. And perhaps that's the difference between like a Kyoto anime-made adaptation and this. Maybe the novel form of the story far surpasses Hyoka in every way, but it's not like I will ever know. In short, this is an interesting small-scale mystery series in the same vein as Hyoka, and if you were a fan of that back in the day, and honestly a fan of it now because it still holds up, then maybe you should give this one a shot. I'm personally placing it on hold with the hopes that things get me a little more invested beyond the mysteries that we have, but we'll have to see. Tasuketsu, Fate of the Majority. This one's a weird survival game where every day a question is asked by a mysterious emperor. All participants seem to automatically answer it and fall into two camps based on the question asked. For example, are you male or female? Are you looking at this screen or not? Every person in a particular ward of Tokyo is playing this game, and after every question is asked, the people who fall into the majority are killed. Whomever is left at the end of the game gains the privilege to meet the Emperor, and honestly, why? The survival game itself sounds interesting at first glance, like how the participants can attempt to submit questions to be asked and hopefully ensure their own survival, but like also within 2 episodes, the show's already gone out of its way to introduce so many exceptions to the existing rules that it's not fun anymore to try and figure out how things work and what's going on as an audience member, because it feels to me quite clear that the final result will happen due to some shenanigans with extra or added rules that are impossible to predict. Except, you can predict some things because of the narrative tropes, like our protagonist will obviously be the one to make it almost all the way, or actually all the way to the end. And since that's the most likely outcome, why bother watching the rest of it? I mean, that's my stance on it. If you want to see this thriller where a majority of people just keep dying, except, when they don't, and you find that intriguing, by all means, keep watching. But I'm out. The Elusive Samurai. A historical, I think, action-adventure series that follows a young son of a samurai clan who escapes the death of his entire home after being saved by a somewhat off-kilter Shinto priest. A priest who has the power to see the future? Or at least some of it. Our protagonist's only main skills are his speed and evasive abilities, making him a coward by traditional samurai standards, but he pledges to find allies and gain revenge against those who torched his homeland. Being a Cloverworks show, the animation of this series is an absolute highlight. It's a definite highlight, and how the series will continue to showcase our hero building up this group of allies to strike back for his home will be the main drive and interesting part of the show. However, I've never been one to lean towards watching things with like this semi-historical bent to it. I always feel like I am losing something in translation by not knowing Japanese history. So when they start talking about what era they are in or listing off names of various shogunates in power, I'm sure that means something for people in Japan, but for me, I just lose so much. There is a lot of good here. It just has yet to fully sell me, but I will say that there is enough for me to try and stick it out a bit, so I'm gonna put it on hold. The magical girl and the evil lieutenant used to be arch-enemies. Alright, so this is actually going to be a bit of an exception because I normally auto-skip every show that airs, which has an episode length under, like, 15 minutes or so. And this one is getting covered despite the fact that every episode is only about 10 minutes long if you take out the opening. Why? Studio Bones? Doing a magical girl series? What? Except it's not really a magical girl series, is it? We're not allowed to do a traditional magical girl show anymore. We can't make things like Sailor Moon and Cardcaptor Sakura, unless, we make exactly Sailor Moon and Cardcaptor Sakura. Instead, all we are allowed to get is a narrative that leans on all of those tropes from the genre, without actually playing anything straight. In this case, we have a romantic comedy where our protagonist is one of the lieutenants to an evil Dark Lord that wants world domination against the humans, and he falls in love at first sight with the local magical girl, a young woman named Mimori, who works at a convenience store and barely has any money for food. Their romance blossoms despite their jobs, putting them at odds with one another. And that is kind of the driving force of the plot. Even by the end of episode 1, it's very clear that the romance between them is not one-sided. But at the end of the day, you have a guy that is working for the Dark King who wants to destroy everything, and you have a girl who's been hired by a talking cat to become a magical girl and save the world. Eventually, something's gotta give. I am keeping this one because I am a connoisseur of the mahou shoujo genre, and I feel obligated to watch it. And also, as a fan of Bones, I just want to see the wonderful animation that this series might hold. But for the general public, I don't know, give it a shot, but it might not be to your taste. For me, though, keep. The Ossan newbie adventurer, trained to death by the most powerful party, became invincible. I've noticed a lot in the past year a distinct increase in shows that feature a middle-aged protagonist who ends up becoming an adventurer or a hero of some kind, where large amounts of time and attention is placed upon their age. Almost as if they are attempting to cater to an audience who fits that demographic, trying to say, no, it's okay if you're not a teenager anymore and are over like twice the age of your typical fantasy protagonist. Even you can become a superpowered, awesome person. If only you lived in a fantasy world where a group of S-rank adventurers personally train you for like 2 years in a way that looks like torture. Well, for someone who does fit into the above demographic, I have to say, I'm not a fan. Moving on. The strongest magician in the Demon Lord's army was a human. And just like that, we've moved on to another narrative that feels like a rehash of things we've seen before. We have a Demon Lord's army where one of its strongest commanders is actually a human, striving for peace between demons and humanity. He doesn't get fired like in the last show I watched, but still the similarities are suspicious. Oddly, the thing that bothers me the most about this series is that our protagonist, our human protagonist, spends so much time trying to protect his identity. He's been told to keep his robe on at all times, to keep his mask on, so that the demons don't figure out he's a human. His real identity is a secret. But then, this human maid sees him with his mask off, and suddenly it's a big deal that she knows his secret. However, his direct demon superior also looks like a human woman, so how this maid would just instinctively know that he's not a demon despite looking like a human. We're not gonna talk about that? Couldn't he have just like played it off? Oh no, I am really a demon. I just wear the mask to frighten people a bit better or something. Why does sharing his secret with this maid matter? Well, I'm sure that'll be plot relevant later. And I am, curious enough to see where the show is going with all of this. But at the same time, there are enough cracks in the narrative to make me worried. Like, I do feel like the narrative will just end with some kind of hand-wavy, actually, the Demon Lord doesn't really want to kill all the humans, and once the demons see how great cooperation with humans truly is, everyone will be happy! Or something. So I'm gonna put it on hold, but despite that, I'm not holding out much hope, honestly. Twilight Out of Focus. Boys love. Do you like BL? Does the idea of an all-boys school that has a film club and includes characters who will inevitably fall in love with one another despite sharing the same gender entice you? Then you will probably like the show. I can't say that with confidence because I'm not that big of a fan of BL personally, so I can't speak to like how much quality this show has compared to others of its genre. But its production quality is pretty high, and it seems to have landed on the right side of the coin flip for Studio Dean. And it seems cute enough. So BL fans, give it a try. And if you're not a BL fan, well, join me in skipping it. Your choice. VTuber legend. How I went viral after forgetting to turn off my stream. Continuing with the theme of feeling like a retread. Okay, maybe I'm wrong, but is this the first time where we've seen a story that has just like the gist of it being that the protagonist became this popular streamer and only became popular because they left their stream running after the fact and then said and did a bunch of things they otherwise wouldn't have. I feel like I've seen this sort of thing before. Am I just imagining it? Either way, that is the gist. We have a character who plays a pure and innocent VTuber online, but then normally turns off her streams to become her real drunken loudmouth self, only to one day forget to end her stream and goes on a drinking binge while watching other VTubers and ASMR streamers, and then falls asleep while her mic is still hot. But, you know, because this is supposed to happen, at least within the narrative of the story, she then becomes massively popular because of this. I think most of the show is fine and all, but I will say, the thing that I don't get, the thing that really bothers me here, is why the real-world actress, the woman who's controlling the VTuber avatar, why does she dress and essentially looks exactly like her VTuber avatar? That's not how this works. You know that, right? That's not how any of this works. With few exceptions, the avatar of a VTuber is designed completely without the actor or actress in mind at all. And even if they were similar enough for her to be able to cosplay as her own avatar, the idea that she would dress up for her streams when there's no camera involved focus on her doesn't make sense. And then she would definitely not go out in public wearing her outfit. Like that whole thing just pulls me out of it. Why is it like that? Why doesn't she have a different character design? Like otherwise, it's a reasonably okay series and I am curious to see where it's heading, so I'm gonna put it on hold, but I don't have any high expectations or anything. Why does nobody remember me in this world? So you have a protagonist who's part of some kind of, I don't know, paramilitary outfit, something that's very combat focused. He's out there trying to help humanity against an onslaught of different demon clans with celestials and beastmen, etc. But one day, after crossing some version of Shibuya Square, reality gets rewritten, though he somehow survives. We're gonna put a pin in that. He survives this world reset, and now the world is in ruins because various wars of the past where humanity succeeded and survived have been reversed. So now they have failed. And our protagonist's goal is to, bring balance to the world again? At least that's what its official synopsis says. And that doesn't make any sense because that doesn't feel like it comes off in the show itself. Also, I feel like the title of the show is off. Our protagonist seems to have been transported into an alternate reality, so the idea that no one remembers him would make sense if he was not there in the first place. Also, if he's not a famous person or anything, why would they remember him? Why is this a question we are even asking? Largely, I feel like this show, while it has potential, is also trying to be too complicated for its own good. And while that can work given the right circumstances, I feel like it hasn't yet struck the right balance between explaining too much, just info dumping the whole setting onto us, while also not explaining enough and just making things confusing. So I'm personally passing on it, but I don't know, your mileage may vary. Go ahead. It's your life. Wistoria, Wand and Sword. And again, I feel like I've heard this one before. Main character joins a magic school and excels towards graduation despite not being able to use magic at all, and then just has extreme physical abilities that help him get through it. That's Mashle! Granted, Mashle is part comedy and ridiculousness, and Wistoria here plays everything straight, so it's got that major difference between them. It's also, as a show, beautiful. It's got a great animation style to it that makes it worth a look for just that, if nothing else. And I mean, trying to see if this boy who can use his other abilities to excel at a magic school in a world where magic is supreme and those who use magic have kind of become a little too stuck up for their own good, that is interesting. But, despite its production quality, I don't know if yet I like it enough to give it a keep straight away. I'm willing to keep an eye on it for now to see how it grows and see more specifically if it grows on me. So for the time being, we're going to put it on hold. But on that somewhat depressing note, that's our show for today. With any luck, you now have a greater amount of knowledge about what is airing this season and what you yourself will want to watch. Not a great crop, if I'm being honest. If possible, I'm going to try and find a way to link in the description all of the places where you can find these shows for legal streaming, but if all else fails, well, I mean, you can just Google the show name and add the word streaming to it. Shouldn't be too difficult to you. So, subscribe if you haven't, hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and until next time, where hopefully we have a much better crop, and hopefully we can talk about a lot more things that are at least more exciting than half of this season. Until then, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime and stay frosty.